All right, we should be good to go. All right, sweet. Thanks for joining us on this webinar, guys. I've spread the wealth on this one to Ryan, JMO, and Caleb, who are going to talk about a couple of key topics we've been seeing, either questions come through or just areas that we think are really important, like for this time of year. Ryan, if you could pop to next slide here. Just wanted to run through for the next couple months. We got a few events coming up. So those of you who aren't aware, we got the 5K this coming weekend. So whether you're local to KW or a remote athlete or in KW and can't make the in-person one, you can still participate. So just hop on there's an event for the 5K in the group. So you can hop on there and submit a result if you can't make it in person. For those coming, 7:30 a.m. We're meeting at RIM. We'll warm up and then start around 8 a.m. And just make sure you confirm if you're going to be joining for the brunch. There's a poll in the Facebook event for the final sprint 5K as well. Swim program with Jeff starts up this Sunday. I know he still has some spots there, so send him an email if you are looking to get involved in that. Great chance to get some triathlon specific swimming with a coach on deck, giving you some feedback. We also have the LP Christmas party. That's joint with the gym. We do that one. That's going to be November 30th. So there's also a link that Michelle posted in the group there for you to be able to register for that. And then we'll have another shorter webinar like this on December 17th. And then we usually do, since we have so many remote athletes, we'll do our big Q1 webinar at the start of the year and usually give out our club awards during that part too. So look out for an invite for that one as well. But that's all I got for you guys. So I'm going to hand it over to Ryan, who has told us we've been guaranteed some sweet animations in his slides. So I'm pumped up for that. But he's going
I
to,
didn't say they were sweet. I just said they were animations.
no, we expect
I
big
need
things.
to,
Let's see it.
uh, I need to tame down the expectations here. Yeah, thanks for having me on here. This is my first LP Endurance webinar, so I'm happy to be here. Let me see if I can get my slides working. There we go. So this is the topic that I'm sharing today, Coach Ryan's magical secrets to running faster. And I'm going to give the disclaimer that none of this is magical, and actually none of them are secrets either. And for some of the athletes that I've worked with longer term, who've kind of come on over with me to LP Endurance, a lot of this will probably be a review for them. But I think this is interesting stuff just to cover in general, particularly around this time of year. Um, so I'll start with just a little bit of an intro about me, since again, I'm fairly new to LP Endurance, but I've been an NCCP triathlon coach since 2009. Again, just joined LP Endurance just recently this fall. But I've known Mark for quite some time, and known quite a few of the folks involved in the club for a while. I feel like it was inevitable that eventually I'd make my way over here in some capacity. But I'm really happy to be here as a coach as well as an athlete. Um, Coaching actually isn't my full-time gig. My day job is I work at Western University as a project manager. Right now I'm working in their sports and rec department, so some fun crossovers with kind of my fun job with coaching. And I've been involved in sport kind of my entire life. So grew up playing team sports. I did my first triathlon in 2007. I raced professionally 2010, 2013. I got a job in 2014. So I've been racing age group ever since. But I think the main reason why I mentioned that is just to give some context that a lot of the principles that I'll be talking about in this slideshow, I've really only been applying as a coach and as an athlete myself over the last 4 or 5 years, and um, I'm racing kind of significantly faster, running a lot faster than I ever did when I was racing elite and training full time for a couple of years, because I'm kind of turning over some stones that I never was when I was doing that. So yeah, so if nothing else, I'm proof that some of this stuff has some merit. Um, but without any further ado, I'll get into my non-magical, non-secrets about running faster. Um, so oftentimes I'll get asked as a coach, how do I get faster? How do I run faster? Well, a simple kind of formula for running is combining your running biomechanics with neuromuscular function. So basically how your muscles and your nerves talk to each other and how your brain talks to your muscles on how to function, as well as aerobic development. And so most of us would think of that last little bit, the aerobic development, as kind of the whole picture with run training. So if someone asked you, what are the key parts of a run plan? You'd probably start by saying, well, yeah, I'm going to start doing easy runs, and then I'll add some long runs and some workouts and some race specific work, things like that. Um, but it really leads to the question, what about those first two parts of that formula? What about the biomechanics and what about the neuromuscular side of things? Um, and so whenever I'm asked that question, how do I get faster? How do I improve my running? I'll respond by saying, well, when was the last time you ran fast? Like really fast? And would an example of really fast be half marathon pace? It might feel really fast if you're, a lifetime marathoner or an Ironman athlete, but really half marathon pace is not that fast. So what about if you're being chased by a bear? Is that running fast? Well, that's actually a trick question because if a bear's chasing you, you shouldn't run away. So forget that part. How about we visualize a dog chasing a squirrel, just like ripping through a field like this effortless, beautiful speed, trying to murder this poor little squirrel. That is the speed that I'm thinking. Like this is how we want you running fast, just effortless, smooth speed, like the dog chasing the squirrel. So how do we train that? How do we kind of teach our bodies or reteach our bodies how to find that effortless speed? Well, we have to practice it. We have to practice running really fast. And so that gets us to kind of the next little bit of my equations of we need to start looking at running economy. And so running economy is essentially how much energy it costs you to run at a certain pace. Um, and running economy is an interesting one because I won't get too much into the weeds of the science here, but running economy can be trained much more and much later into your development as an athlete than something like VO2 max, which if you're a relatively well-trained athlete, is going to stay pretty much level throughout your career before it starts dropping off in older age. Um, but improving running economy is a really interesting one because it means that if we're improving kind of the amount of energy you're expending to run at a certain pace, it means that you're getting more efficient at every pace that you're running. And so how do we train running economy? How do we kind of unlock this hidden potential that a lot of us have, especially those who may not have come from, say, like a collegiate running background where you spent many years of your life training running really fast around a track or something. Um, so the way that we do that, the way that we incorporate that as endurance athletes is incorporating short little bursts of fast running while maintaining good running form um, into our training. So short, kind of controlled bursts of speed that actually train the body to run faster and with less energy. So this is like the big key for me when it comes to run training is running economy such a critical aspect of it that I think is often overlooked, particularly on, um, let's say, later onset athletes. People like most of us who come into endurance sports later in life didn't grow up with a professional running background or something. So what does that look like? How do we start incorporating these kind of running economy focused workouts? How do we start developing that running economy in our training? The first step in it is what I or what Mark will you'll probably see are called strides. And so strides are say like a 15 to 30-second effort that are not quite an all-out sprint because we don't want you like really muscling and fighting through, but really finding that sweet spot where you're running kind of as fast as possible while still staying like really smooth, really relaxed. And so the cue that I'll often give is like if you're running an 800 meter or even a 1 mile time trial on a track, what kind of speed would you be chasing? And that's like take your all out maximum dog zoomy sprint and bring that down just a couple percent so you're running nice and smooth, nice and relaxed. And that's kind of what we're trying to target with strides. And we're taking lots of rest in between these intervals because we don't actually want it to be like a super aerobically taxing workout. We're really just trying to prioritize those little bits of speed because that's what's going to be training our neuromuscular system to start firing more efficiently over time. So the way this works is regularly incorporating stride sets. So let's say 4 to 8 sets of these short strides has a ton of benefits at the physiological level. So it's ingraining more efficient neuromuscular firing, and so that's just a fancy way of saying it improves your running form without like having to really consciously think about good running form. Because ironically, there have been some studies that have shown if you're like thinking really hard about trying to run really well with great form, you actually become less efficient. And so it's a bit of a double-edged sword there, but running smooth, running fast, it ingrains efficient muscle firing. It increases your tendon stiffness. So think about like your Achilles tendon. If you think about it like a spring, where if it's a little bit stiffer, you're going to get better pop out of it. You know, when you hear about let's say commentators at the Olympics talking about how much spring someone has in their step when they're running. That's exactly what we're talking about. So think about it like springiness in your step. Um, Doing these strides increases your tendon stiffness, which helps with that. It also doing these strides also changes muscle protein expression. I'm not going to get too much into the super nerdy details on that, um, but it essentially kind of changes at a almost a cellular level what how your muscle fibers are firing and which ones are firing and weight makes it more efficient over time. Um, Also may have positive hormonal effects, a little bit like strength training has really positive hormonal effects. So you can think about these little strides almost like little strength sessions in your run as well. But the long story short is over time incorporating these what I'd call speed development workouts or speed development sets, these strides. Um, when we're training that kind of top end speed, it has a cascading effect to all other run speeds slower than that. So you can think about it two ways. You can either think it's making, let's say, like my 7 out of 10 running effort faster, or you can think about it that my whatever 5 or 6 minutes per kilometer pace is now feeling easier because I've been pushed higher end up with these strides. And so how do I use this? How do I incorporate this into my training? The first part I just have to say off the bat, if you have a coach, start by listening to your coach. I had to get that part out of the way first. But the way that we as coaches kind of we'll start incorporating these types of things for particularly for athletes who this might be super new to, is we'll start by doing short uphill strides. And so like a 10 or a 15-second steep uphill. And the hill reduces kind of the impact forces, which is good for injury prevention, especially if you're new to this type of thing. But also it forces you to run with good run form. Like you can't run up a 10% hill like way overstriding and like with terrible form. Like you without even thinking about it, you'll be running with smooth form, landing under your center of gravity, driving your arms, doing all the good things that make you more efficient over the long term. Over time, we then progress those uphill strides to running on flat ground. And the idea behind that is when you're running on flat ground, of course, you're running faster than if you're running up a hill. And so we're kind of dialing up the notch with the speed at which you're executing these little efforts. Again, with lots of rest, and so it shouldn't be a super taxing effort. We're really just kind of doing these quick, short bursts of speed, shutting it down before it even really starts to hit your lungs. Take a bit of rest, do it all over again. So you can incorporate sets like that into really any of your easy runs. I like doing them towards the end of a long run, especially if you've got a long run where you're feeling a little bit drained or a little bit draggy towards the end of a run. Throw in a handful of like 10 to 15-second strides, and uh, you'll have your running form back like so easily. It's also a really good time to mention this time of year because right now, for most of us who are probably on off season or kind of building back into our full routine, these types of sets can actually just replace what would be like a track workout or a speed workout that you would be doing later in the year. So I've given an example, just a pretty straightforward example below of what I might prescribe as a coach for what these types of workouts would look like. So again, nice, easy aerobic warm up. Then we'd hit, let's say it's 8 times 30 seconds at these strides at about 1 mile pace, or again, about 90% of an all out sprinting effort. And then 90 seconds really nice and easy in between. So plenty of rest. So this shouldn't be a very taxing workout, but you're getting these little quick doses of speed that I think you'll really find you'll start feeling that pop in your step pretty quickly. And then over time, over months or years of incorporating this stuff throughout the year, that's where like the really big gains and the really big improvements come. And then it's worth mentioning that I haven't touched on this yet, but certain aspects of strength training can really help with improving running economy as well. So doing plyometrics, explosive power movements, a lot of the exercises that we're already doing in our awesome strength sessions also really help with improving our running economy with our movement efficiency as well. I'll add one more question here because I'll often get this. That's all great. You're doing all these like sprints all over the place, and you're going up these hills super fast. But why does it matter if I'm training for an Ironman and my goal is like to just run the thing and not walk, or like walk less than 50% of it or something? But the thing is, endurance sports are an efficiency game. And so when we're training the body to fire more efficiently, it makes every pace easier after we do that. So again, kind of what I was mentioning earlier, you can look at it two ways. Either your pace will get faster at the same effort, or the same pace will get easier. And so this stuff is critical regardless of the distance you're doing. If I was training an athlete to run a 100-miler, I would still have them doing this. This would be like the foundation of their training, because it's so critical for any speed at which you're running. So that's kind of my conclusion on this: is improving our running economy means being more efficient at every distance, at every pace. And so you can't afford not to do it. And I'll add some references here just to prove I'm not making this stuff up, but I won't get into it too much. If anyone wants me to send those links or any other studies, I'm happy to, but I've probably already used up more than my share of time here. So thank you.
Awesome, Ryan. Do you want to drop that off and I'll take it over and I can set
Yep.
Jameson up here? Cool. Let me get the share going. All right, we should be good to go. So we're going to kick it over to Jameson here.
All right, great. Thanks, Mark. And I feel like this topic actually segues kind of nicely from what Ryan was talking about, because you'll notice that like there are some pace guidelines when it comes to strides, but I think once you get a little more practice doing strides, you kind of just get to a point where you're like, I'm running hard with good form, but I know what that feels like. And it's not something where you maybe have to look at your watch and say, okay, I'm running 4 minutes a K and that's my stride pace. It's just something that you do, and it feels natural and intrinsic. And that kind of ties in nicely to my topic today, which is why I think you should throw your watch in the trash and use RPE in your training, or as a part of your training. And I guess you don't have to throw your watch in the trash permanently, but there are times where it might do more harm than good. And what do I mean by RPE? If you're unfamiliar with that initialism, it stands for rate of perceived exertion. So I just think of it as a scale from 1 to 10, where 1 is you're really not exerting yourself at all, and 10 is you're going as hard as you can. And then you've got all the numbers in between to kind of play with, and just thinking about that 1 to 10, how hard am I working right now scale, and how useful it could be in your training. Next slide, Mark. Okay, so you don't actually have to put your hands up. There are 17 people here and 3 of them are coaches, and we don't have to all do the Zoom hands, but you can just kind of raise your hand behind your screen when each of these prompts come up. So number 1, if you have used your pre-programmed workout mode on your watch for a run, bike, or swim, where you have some intervals set up there that are automatically triggering based on the distance that you've run or the time that you've run. You can raise your hand to yourself for that one. Number two, if you've ever felt like you had a workout set up, maybe either in your watch or just you had the paces in the back of your mind, and for whatever reason you didn't hit your targets that day, and you came away thinking, oh, like I failed that, I bombed that. But you can put your hand up. And then third, if maybe you achieved the workout, you successfully completed the workout, you hit the paces that you were supposed to hit that day, but you had to work way harder than you wanted to hit those paces, and then because of that you felt like destroyed the next couple of days, because even though you hit what your targets were supposed to be in terms of numbers that day, you actually pushed past the intended exertion of the workout, and because of that it probably took you a little bit longer to recover, and maybe you were on the shelf for 2 or 3 days after. I know I can relate to all of these for what it's worth. Okay, so some of this all ties into using this workout mode, and I think here we can also just use workout mode as a proxy for completing a workout or completing any run and focusing really, really heavily on pace or on some sort of data source. It could even be something like heart rate, where you're really locked in on numbers and you're saying, okay, I need to hit these numbers or else I haven't done this workout right. There are some good things about this mentality and this mindset, and here I'm referring specifically to these pre-programmed workouts on your watch. But I would say, number one, if you do have a workout just loaded right into your watch, then you don't need to remember it, which can be hard sometimes. You just got all your intervals in there. It beeps and tells you when you need to start running faster or running slower, and that's great. Number two, it helps with pacing. So whether you're doing a pre-programmed workout or you just have like some numbers written on your hand or something, it is helpful to know, especially as you're just starting out, what does 6 minutes a kilometer feel like compared to 5:30, compared to 5 minutes per kilometer, whether it's in the pool or on the bike. I'm a running coach, so I don't mess with those, but I know it's the same thing. So having those numbers in mind does help with pacing. And then I think as you're a beginner too, when you have a number in mind and you're really keeping an eye on it on your watch or looking at it after the fact, and then you're actively making connection between the pace that you're running and how you're feeling, that does help to make connections between those specific paces and the associated effort level. We don't just put on our running shoes for the first time and know, I'm running at marathon effort. This is what a marathon would feel like. Like, you wouldn't know that if it was your first run ever. It takes some time to learn that stuff. And so these workout modes or these focuses on numbers can be really helpful. At the same time, there are some cons. One that really comes to mind for me, especially as we're in off season, if you were peaking for your racing season in July or August as a triathlete, and it's November and you've had your foot off the gas a little bit, which is natural, you're not going to be in identical shape as you were in July or August when you're peaking. And so if you're still thinking about your workouts and setting your pace targets based on that fitness that you had in July and August, that may not be accurate anymore. And if you don't have an accurate picture of your current fitness, then the zones you're setting for yourself aren't going to be right on, and you're almost setting yourself up for failure because you don't have that alignment between where you're at now and the numbers you're trying to hit. Using a pre-programmed workout or not making these adjustments is an inflexible approach based on how you're feeling. And we'll get into an example in a little bit, because every day you're going to feel a little different, and the same pace could feel radically different on 2 different days. Similarly, it doesn't capture all the variables that impact any given workout. I know for the folks here in KW, we had a day this summer where we went to the track at 6 a.m. and it was pouring. It was like biblical. There were puddles on the track that you had to run through. So, I think for the people who went that day, if they were 5 seconds a K off on their paces, like, it's probably fine because they were running through Great Lakes on the track at St. David's. Next, I think that when you're a little too focused on numbers, it can discourage or make it harder to get into the kind of flow state that as endurance athletes we want to be achieving. Like, it's such a great feeling when, maybe you're running a longer interval, or you're just out for an easy run and you're not looking at your watch every 30 seconds to check how you're doing, or if you're working too hard. You just know that you're working at the right intensity, or that you're running at a pace that feels like it's the right level of effort. And then finally, this doesn't happen all the time, but what if your workout changes? Like, let's say it's a Sunday morning, you've loaded 2 by 20 minute marathon tempos into your watch. But then, you know, a couple friends show up and they just want to do an easy run or they want to do a progression or something. And you're like, well, I already started my workout. What will I do? I guess I'll have to throw it in the garbage. Like, it seems minor, but I know that's definitely happened to me before where I've gone, oh God, like my whole day is ruined because I'm not doing my 2 by 20 minute marathon tempos. Anyway, we can go to the next slide, Mark. Okay, and why could RPE vary during a given run? And, you know, I mentioned earlier these different variables that can affect any given workout, right? And this is an incomplete list, but I think these are ones that we're all going to be pretty familiar with and that come up commonly. So first, temperature. You know, we're in a great time right now to be doing speed work on the track because it's like going to be 2 degrees and mega crispy in the morning. When it was 30 degrees and the humidity was 90% in the summer, guess what? That's going to affect your RPE. It's way harder to run at those speeds. Fuel and hydration, especially in a long run, if you're not fueling enough, you're not taking in enough water on a hot day, that's going to really drastically affect your RPE, especially the longer you go. Elevation change, if you're running a really hilly route, of course, that's going to feel harder and be harder than if you're just doing a flat loop. Acute or cumulative fatigue, you know, maybe you're in the 4th or 5th week of building and your legs are just feeling so flat, and you know you're going to notice that it's not the same as if you're at the end of a 2-week taper and ready to race. The kind of surface that you're on, I know for me, and I'm sure for some of the other big rigs in the club, like you put me on gravel and I don't have my all-terrain tires equipped, like that's going to affect my RPE. I find it really hard to get traction, you know, as opposed to just running on pavement. If you're by yourself versus in a group, I know my RPE is always way lower when I'm chatting with my friends, even if we're, you know, rolling some intervals. If you slept poorly, happens all the time. It's going to make you feel bad the next day. If you had a few beers, I don't know, I guess this one's personal experience, but that might affect your RPE. The whims of the running gods, and then literally anything, because that's the thing about RPE. And that's the thing about being like a runner or an athlete who's adopting a holistic approach. We can't always boil down how we're feeling to like 6 specific reasons and then explain it away. Sometimes it's just a vibe, and it actually pays to be responsive and adaptable when the vibe is a little off, to make sure that you're getting the right thing out of the workout that's been prescribed that day. Next slide, Mark. Okay, so creating positive reinforcement. I wanted to share some like tools, you know, maybe just some ways to think about this topic when you are rolling into workouts in the future, because I think as really goal-oriented, detail-oriented people, like if you're part of this club, that description applies to you. It's easy for us to be hard on ourselves, right? If you had a workout where you just weren't feeling it that day and you had to, you know, maybe you pulled the chute early and skipped a couple reps, or you ran slower than you thought you were going to, like it's easy to get down to the dumps because we all have numbers in our heads and it feels good to tick that box and get it done the way we envisioned it. But that can lead to some negative self-talk when you have an off day, right? You might say something like, I failed this workout. Oh, I guess I'm not as fit as I thought I was. I'm going to get a coach's note. Coach Mark's going to tell me I blew up on the last rep. I should have ran slower. You know, all these things might come into your mind. And I think that if you get into the habit of really checking in with yourself, like before a workout, as the workout is just starting, and then not being afraid to either tweak your plan or just monitor the intensity with which you're running a given rep, and then kind of reframe these negative things and just look at the workout a different way. You know, instead of saying, oh, I failed this workout because, you know, my marathon effort tempos were 10 seconds per K slower than I wanted them to be. You can say, you know what, that actually felt like marathon effort. And so I think I achieved the intent of this workout. Even if I wasn't as fast today as I know I can be at my best, I still got what I was supposed to get out of this workout. And that was the point. You know, another way to say it, you know, I'm not as fit as I thought. It's that I made an adjustment that's smart based on how I'm feeling today. I'm not going to burn out. I'm not going to overtax myself or overexert myself. I'm just playing the hand that I've been dealt as an athlete today. And my coach is going to appreciate that. My coach is going to appreciate me being a like mature, flexible athlete who's not just mindlessly trying to hit a number, but is responding to the conditions and how they feel on any given day, because that's what makes a healthier, more resilient athlete in the long run, is being able to take it easy on yourself and to make those changes, and to know that, you know, even if the short term, the graph doesn't look, not every run is positive, or not every workout is positive, that if you zoom out and look at the long term, you're contributing to gradual improvement. That's the mindset that any coach on the team would want you to adopt. And to give you an example, I wanted to pull a very recent case study from my own life. I ran an October long run. I think it was October 20th. Some people who are on the webinar were probably there with me here listening to my complaining. So I posted the instructions that were given in Training Peaks for this long run, and then the laps from my workout in Strava. And I'll just kind of talk through a couple of the things that you're seeing here. So, pretty straightforward run, just like easy zone 1 warm up, kind of lock into zone 2. Again, RPE 3.5 or 3 to 5 out of 10. That's a great indicator for me. I know that's a range where I don't need to look at my watch at all. I can just kind of let myself warm up naturally. As long as I'm at a talking pace, I'm achieving the intent of that part of the workout. And then there's a tempo in the back half, 10 to 15 minutes, marathon up to half marathon effort before a short cool down. For me, just based on where my fitness is at, I had just run a 5K a couple of weeks before this long run, so I knew what my zones were. And I'd say marathon to half marathon for me at this point, anywhere from 410 to 420 a K would be normal, right? But if you look at the laps on this day, I did not hit that. I ran a 10-minute tempo, so I didn't go all the way to the end of the time range. And I was a little slower than that 410 to 420 range. I ended up at 430. The gap was a little bit faster, but not drastically so. And then if you look at the average heart rate, 171 BPM, this will come up in a second, but for me, that's actually where I would want to be heart rate wise in the first 5 to 10K of a marathon. I'd love to be floating around that 170 BPM. So to me already, that's a clue that, maybe the modification I made on this day to run this tempo a little bit slower was actually right in terms of intensity and RPE. And when we go to the next slide, I'll give you more details as to why. Okay, so let's talk it through. So first of all, the route that we chose for the tempo on this day, if you're from the KW area, you probably know this trail pretty well. This is a trail going through Columbia Lake and up through the north part of campus at the University of Waterloo. We started at the bottom of this picture where Columbia Lake is, and then worked our way up past Behringer Road up toward where we started the run. So first, this is a net uphill route. You start with like a very, very steep downhill for about 3 seconds, and then you just are gradually working your way up the rest of the tempo. It's all on gravel, so it's going to be a little harder to work on there than just running this on like a flat paved route. It's a twisting route with tree cover. Why do I mention that? Because there could be some GPS anomalies there. Like I find when I'm running in a wooded or covered area, I'm not always getting to pick up on the signal, and watches are great tools, but they are kind of unreliable, right? And so that's just the thing to keep in mind. They're not always perfect. I would say the critical thing for this workout though, in this tempo, is that Murphy, who is my dog, had diarrhea the night before this run at around 1 o'clock in the morning. And as you can see from my screenshot from my Training Peaks, my metrics from the watch, I never went back to sleep, got a solid 1.17 hours that night. So wow, I was feeling amazing. Peak on the body battery of 22. We love to see that. So guess what? It was going to be a bad day. It was a miracle that I even showed up to the workout. And because of that, like it was just like, to me, I knew, from the second I started running, from the second I woke up that morning, that probably me running a perfect, 4:15 locked in marathon tempo was just not in the cards, right? I've got to play the hand that I've been dealt. And so, Lisa was there, as she noted, Murphy, ha ha ha. Yes, we played Murphy. The people I was running with that day, I was like, guys, I don't have like 410 or 420 in me today for marathon effort, but let's just kind of push like 7 out of 10 and see what happens. And, that's the pace I ended up with, 430 a K. But when I look at that average heart rate number, and when I just think about how I felt running this tempo, I know it was at a 7 out of 10 effort wise. And I'm confident that by taking it down a couple seconds a K, like I didn't fail. I didn't miss my target. I ran the best rep that I could, and the purest rep that I could in terms of intent on 1 hour sleep. And it just happens, right? As happens. And that's the approach that I encourage everybody to take is, of course, you want to hit those numbers, best case scenario, and it feels good. And when you know what your numbers are that you're trying to hit, or whatever workout you could have programmed into your watch. But I really, really encourage you to think about each workout holistically and think about what it means for a rep or a workout to be successful given the context in which you're completing it. I think it's just a healthier way to look at not only each workout you're completing, but just your reality and your progression as an athlete, because we've all got stuff going on in our lives and we're all doing the best we can every day despite that stuff. And sometimes the stuff is more overwhelming than it is on other days, and you just do the best you can with what you've got. And the parting thought I'll leave you with is, Mark mentioned earlier, we've got this final sprint coming up on Saturday, 5K time trial. And I think for a lot of people, this is going to be a great opportunity to get fresh numbers on the run. Like if you're feeling like I can run this 5K all out, I'm ready to go max intensity for that time trial, then not only are you going to get a fresh 5K time, but you're going to get an updated sense of, okay, what can 10K pace be for me? What's my half marathon pace? What's that marathon pace? And it's great to have those numbers. But if 2 weeks go by and you have a workout and there's some, reps at 10K pace, and on that day you don't hit them because something's gone on, it's not the end of the world. It's great to have those numbers. They're not the be all and all end all. Just trust yourself to take all these different data points and all this different information and put together as a sense of how things went for you that day. Hopefully that makes sense. That's the end of my spiel. And yeah, thanks everybody.
Thanks, JMO. All right, over to Caleb.
All right, thank you. A couple tough acts to follow there, and Mark actually took a risk today in giving me 2 topics, and I think everyone knows how I could speak to probably both of these for an hour in and of themselves, but I won't do that today. I'll keep it super high level and quick. And the first one is really just kind of your regular annual reminder from me to incorporate lots of low intensity in your training. And the first thing that we'll look at is just a little case study or analysis that was done and shows the intensity control for a top level athlete. I promise I won't use any science or complicated data analytics in this, but in order to actually understand this analysis, I think everyone's familiar with the 5-zone model, which is shown here. But this study, as with a lot of research studies, was actually done using a 3-zone model. So this is what the 5-zone model looks like. And then Mark, if you go to the next slide, this is what the 3-zone model looks like that a lot of the research is based on. Long story short, the main takeaways for everyone today, since we're most familiar with a 5-zone model, is that zone 1 effectively goes up to the top of zone 2 in that 5-zone model, and zone 4 is just above that second line there that says MLSS, LT2, VT2, and yeah, it's above that. So I won't go into what those terms mean today because frankly, it doesn't matter for the purposes of this, but we can certainly touch on that at another date. So I think most people are familiar with the athlete pictured here. An analysis was conducted on Christian Blumenfeld's training from 2020 to 2022. And just a reminder of what he accomplished during that time is he became the Olympic champion in Tokyo in the men's triathlon. He was the World Triathlon Championship Series world champion. He was the Ironman world champion in 2021. And he was also the Ironman 70.3 world champion during that period as well. So what were the findings from this? If we go to the next slide. So everyone's familiar with the Norwegians, or maybe not everyone, but a lot of people are familiar with them and how they train a lot. There's a lot of social media talk about how they train upwards of 30, 35 hours a week. But what this data showed is, yes, he trained a lot, 26 hours a week on average, but that's not as much as social media would have you believe. And I think what's most interesting about the training, and it isn't all that dissimilar to other studies that have been done on other athletes, is that over 85% of all of his cycling training, 88% of all run training, and 95% of all of his swim training was conducted in zone 1. So that's that capped at zone 2 in a 5-zone model. So as you can see there, I mean, that's a ton of low intensity. and only 5% of his total training volume was conducted at paces exceeding his threshold, which for our intents and purposes is that 15 to half marathon pace that Mark talks about in running, and that 60-minute power pace in cycling. But yeah, if we go to the next slide. So what does this mean? This is all great and all, but what does this mean for me? So obviously Christian trains more than we all do, but these findings can still be scaled down to whatever volume it is that we're doing. So while he may be doing 85% in that zone 1, this might mean 80% for you. So you can incorporate a higher volume of low intensity than you think. Sorry, my dog is whining at me in the background here, so nothing like a distraction here in the webinar. And obviously the goal with intensity and volume in general is that we want to try to maximize the volume of training you can do in that zone 1. So that zone 1 and 2, within the constraints of your life, of course, and not let intensity limit this. There's plenty of studies out there that show that one of the number one predicting performance predictors for Ironman, especially performance, is time spent under that. I'll just say, I'll keep the science out of it and just say time spent in that zone 1. So don't kind of sleep on the low intensity either. We've got the strides that we're adding into that low intensity stuff, but I'd almost much rather an athlete go longer than go quicker and shorter when they're doing those low intensity sessions. And the other thing, just at the bottom there, so don't be fooled by intensity. Intensity is great. Obviously, it's the main driver in moving the needle forward, but improvements from high intensity plateau relatively quickly. So we're talking weeks here that those improvements peak out, and improvement from low intensity can continue for years. So as has been said from some of the other presentations today, listen to your coaches. So there's a time and place for zone 2. That's the 3-zone model, zone 2. So your marathon, half marathon, Olympic, and Ironman preps, and zone 3 training. So that's your high intensity stuff. So the 5K build up, sprint training, specific training, and even general preparation right now as we're training for 5Ks and just working on getting faster overall. We have this programmed accordingly. So you'll often hear Mark talk about this as well, and how we go from polarized to pyramidal. And that's strictly with that build up in mind. And at the bottom there is just a quote. I don't remember where it came from, but it's so simple, but yet it's often forgotten. In that when we're doing these high intensity track sessions and we're calling for 5K pace, be sure to actually run 5K pace. And this quote just kind of summarizes it perfectly: is if you want to train faster, if you want to run a faster 5K pace in training, then race faster. So just a reminder that if you can, just a reminder to make sure that you are running the appropriate paces and not kind of spoiling some of the adaptations that we're seeking here. And lastly, it's probably everyone's favorite time of year on the bike. That's the power profile and critical power testing. So that's coming up, I think, next week. So what is critical power? Critical power measured in watts is the power output that an athlete can sustain for a prolonged period of time without the rapid onset of fatigue. So it's basically the threshold between a steady state effort and one that leads to rapid fatigue. So as you can see in that definition, above that critical power, the energy demand can only be sustained briefly, whereas below it, it can be sustained over a longer period of time. So I mentioned I wasn't going to get too complicated today, but while critical power or critical pace and functional threshold power and functional threshold pace are often used interchangeably, they are actually technically slightly different in the research and applied science, with critical power and pace actually being generally identified as a higher work rate. But for the purposes of today, we'll assume that they're the same. Just remember that sentence above there. So the testing. So I'm going to speak about the testing from a bike standpoint, but it's important to note that these tests can actually be conducted for running as well. So we're talking about critical power, but there's also critical pace or critical speed or critical velocities. So you could theoretically do these same tests for running and even swimming. The times themselves don't particularly matter that much, and I think to be honest, as we were just sitting here listening to the other presentations and knowing that there's the 5K time trial coming up, I was thinking that with most of the people doing a 5K time trial, it's probably not a bad idea to get the full power profile. So if you have time to do like a 1 mile all out or something like that, something that kind of fits within these confines, it might be a good idea to get a critical velocity baseline as well. But for the cycling tests, so we're going to do a 1 minute max effort test, a 5 minute max effort test, and a 20 minute max effort test. So these tests are pretty brutal in and of themselves, but I would recommend doing these on separate days. You could do them on the same day, but be cruel and an unusual punishment. And why have we chosen those three specific durations? The durations themselves don't necessarily matter, but the reason for 1 and 5 is 1 is a good indication of your anaerobic capacity. So doing a 1 minute max effort test will get a pretty good idea of where your anaerobic system is. And 5 minutes is generally a good proxy for VO2 max. So we'll get a good idea of where your VO2 max power, or PVO2, is at a given time. And then the 20 minute will let us know a little bit more about your drop off and power drop off or pace drop off, that is, and how that typically, how that affects the entire curve. So if you're doing, whether you want to do it in running and or cycling as well, basically you conduct those 3 tests, you take your test values and input them into that link there. So it's quite small, but it's a website called XPhysLab. So basically Exercise Physiology Lab, and there's a whole bunch of different calculators and stuff there. But the one that we want to use is the critical power or critical speed calculator. And then once you input those 3 values, just choose the critical power or critical speed with the lowest standard error of estimate, or SEE. And that'll be your new critical power / FTP and critical speed in that case. So why aren't we just doing a 20-minute power test, which is historically the norm when it comes to FTP testing? As many of you know, we did this last year as well. And from those results, we saw that an athlete's critical power, or FTP, was on average 93% of their 20-minute power. So slightly different than the 95% that you often see quoted. But again, there was significant individual variation. So we saw from 90% all the way up to 97%. So you can see a one size fits all approach just doesn't really work when it comes to nailing down those values. So this testing, as I mentioned, takes a 3-dimensional approach to an athlete's power profile. So while a critical power and FTP is identified and useful as part of this power profiling process, the power at each of these durations, as I mentioned, when we're talking about the anaerobic capacity and aerobic capacity, being VO2 in that case, it actually tells us a lot about both your aerobic and anaerobic systems, and allows us to monitor improvements and make changes to training as indicated. So something to keep in mind in doing these 3-dimensional tests is that you can have 2 athletes training for an Ironman that have the exact same FTP of 200 watts, but they achieve these in very different ways. So what does that mean in saying that? Well, one may have a much larger anaerobic contribution than aerobic contribution than the other. So one may be better suited at shorter efforts, while another may actually be able to hold that 200 watts for quite a bit longer. The practical implication of this, and it's a big thing in something like an Ironman or a long distance triathlon where energy balance and conservation is king, is that the proper Ironman race power targets, or even 70.3 race power targets for these two athletes, despite the same FTP, will actually be very different. So it's not as simple as 68 to 75% of FTP. So what are the practical applications of your power profile? So being armed with your 1 minute, 5 minute, and 20 minute power it's not just a nice to have, it's actually incredibly valuable and useful. So ideally this time of year, and I would say up until probably April, May, in base training, we want all of these numbers to kind of improve together. So when we test this again in a little while, we want all of your powers to kind of move up, the 1 minute, the 5 minute, and the 20 minute. Whereas after that standpoint, as we start to get prepared for races and race season, we will care more about the long power, obviously, as it pertains to locking in like a race target and whatnot. So even though we want those three powers to be improving together as part of this time, it's not always the case. And oftentimes there is training interventions that are required, meaning it's important to focus on something else. Like you may have to focus more on your 5 minute power or your 20 minute power at a given point in time. So it's important to know what is happening to your physiology with a 3D approach than just a 20 minute test. Just some really basic examples of how you can utilize your power profile to actually change training and or prescribe it. So these are just two specific examples that are basically just the opposite of each other. But once you have your critical power, if that critical power or FTP is really close to your 5 minute power, and the example I gave here is 85% or greater, you're actually not really going to be physiologically able to lift your FTP much more than that. So instead, you'll actually have to raise the roof, so to speak, and raise that 5 minute power to give you the necessary space to raise your FTP further later on. So the prescription for that type of athlete would be to put the FTP work on maintenance and focus on raising VO2 max for the next block. And then the reverse is also true. So if your critical power and FTP is low relative to your 5 minute power, so say less than 80%, unless you're training for a 5 minute event, which most of us are not doing in this club, you'll gain a lot more by lifting your FTP and putting your VO2 max on maintenance work for a little while. So it's the exact opposite prescription. So those are just kind of two basic scenarios that where you can utilize your power profile. But I think that might be it for me, Mark. Yeah, so like I said, that was a super quick crash course without any science or anything with dogs whining at me and barking. But yeah, if anyone's interested in learning more, like I said, I'm happy to speak about this for kind of hours on end. And or if anyone needs any help in interpreting your own results from testing. And as we mentioned, or as I mentioned, it can also be done for running too. So we focused on cycling, but these same tests and approaches can work for running too. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions.
Awesome. Thanks to the three of you for sharing all that awesome info. Lots of food for thought for everyone, but we'll shut it down there, and I'll post the recording as well in case anybody needs to go back and peel through any of those slides to get some of the data again in there. So thanks again, guys. Everyone have a good night, and we'll see you guys in the morning for track or Thursday for bike. Have a good night, everyone.